You know, Miles, the governor of California, Governor Gavin Newsom, put on X, the federal government is sowing chaos so they can have an excuse to escalate. And I want to call us all back to a New York Times article that says Trump has regret over not using this law that we're talking about to quell BLM protests. During a campaign rally in 2023, the New York Times writes, Trump made clear he was not going to hold back in a second term. Quote, "You're supposed to not be involved in that. You just have to be asked by the governor or the mayor to come in. More importantly, the next time I'm not waiting." Does it feel to you like this is all pretext to what they have been wanting to do anyway?
Yes, and it is. This is, in my opinion, the single most significant act you've seen yet in the Trump administration. People are going to start to come to that realization over the next few days. This is the big one. This is the one that people like me were warning about. When I came forward first in 2020 and started talking about the things I was most worried about that I saw in the first Trump administration that the president wanted to do, at the top of that list was deploying the U.S. military on U.S. soil to enforce domestic law. We had stopped Donald Trump in 2019 from invoking the Insurrection Act because we and our lawyers didn't think the way he wanted to do it was legal. In fact, I rushed to the White House as he was planning to make the State of the Union address, and he wanted to insert a line about how he was invoking the act and deploying the U.S. military on U.S. soil. We felt like that was a dangerous, slippery slope so that Donald Trump would end up taking control of national law enforcement. Make no mistake, his own lieutenants were worried he would create a de facto police state if he was going to be deploying the military on U.S. soil. What is happening in Los Angeles is not a rational response to what they're seeing on the ground. This is indeed, in my view, pre-planned to be able to give the president justification to invoke the Insurrection Act. And it made sense that where they decided to do these raids was Los Angeles. I very firmly believe in the White House, they suspected the response would be protests, and then they could use the protests as a response to use the Insurrection Act. But this is much, much bigger than Los Angeles. I'm telling you, from the first term, if Donald Trump had gotten the authority to use the military on U.S. soil to enforce domestic law, it was going to go much beyond enforcement of immigration law. That was our fear, and we are seeing potentially the early innings of that play out in real time. So this is very, very significant. Folks need to wake up, and I don't suspect they're going to be going and asking governors for their permission in other states where they try to deploy the military on U.S. city streets.
Miles, could you keep going a bit with that, since you were Chief of Staff at Homeland Security during the first Trump administration? And can you talk about what when the protests started during Black Lives Matter, there was not an immediate coordinated response like what we saw yesterday. And when we have top officials immediately calling this an insurrection, we have the border czar on the ground in Los Angeles. What do you make of the decision to be in California, where Trump has threatened to cut off federal funding, instead of, say, Texas or Florida?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I think the difference between these two periods of time is there are no more John Kellys. There are no more folks like me and Mark Esper and Rex Tillerson and you name it in an administration to convince the president not to go forward with this. I think he would have done something on a much more sweeping scale during the Black Lives Matter protests if there hadn't still been people behind the scenes like the Secretary of Defense saying we can't go as far as the president wants to. But I go back to, I think this is a lot more significant than people are realizing. To have the United States military enforcing U.S. law is a giant, giant leap. And in the way the Trump administration looks to be going about it, we haven't seen anything like that in half a century. And I would suspect it ends up being unlike anything we've ever seen, perhaps since the American Civil War. Now, again, we're early. I'm just prognosticating here, but I'm telling you, this is what he wanted to do. And it was something that folks were very, very alarmed about because they didn't think the president was going to have the willingness or ability to check himself in terms of how to implement those authorities. He very much wanted his own private police force in the United States. This sounds crazy to say, but when I first came forward to talk about my fears about the Insurrection Act, I said the president referred to these as his, quote, magical powers. Those were his words and not my words, because Donald Trump came into the presidency and asked his lawyers, basically, what's the height of my power? Where can I really execute things where no one can second guess me? And he learned about the Insurrection Act very, very early in the presidency. And so So with regularity, when he ran into an issue where he couldn't overcome it, or he was told the judges would stop him, or he couldn't enforce this or that law, he would bring it up and say, this is where I should use my magical powers, which of course seemed like very bizarre words for a president of the United States to be using. That's how he views these powers right now.